Welcome back to the Studio Wesley Annex, the audiovisual podcast where we break down the lectionary text of the week. I'm your host, Sam Stiles-Williams, and I'm joined by three of the loveliest people at Studio Wesley, which is why we've talked for an hour before starting this recording. We're going to start with Tess. Tess, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing great. Even though this won't be published for a couple of weeks and this might be old news by then, the Gators are national champions. That will still be true in a couple of weeks, so I don't mind saying it. Yeah, it's been a crazy week here in Gainesville, but it's been a ton of fun.
My extended family is very proud of me because I rooted for the Gators, which is a big deal in my family because my dad is a huge Georgia Bulldogs fan. And I went back to my heritage to say go Gators. So congratulations. Go Gators. I'll say it again publicly. Vendela, we're going to go down. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. You did call us cutie in the group chat before we got on. And so I was a little bummed that you didn't say I'm here with three of my cuties or something like that. But it's okay.
That was a missed opportunity. That was my bad.
I know.
We can call ourselves the cuties from now on.
Yeah.
I like to fit the vibe.
No, it's fine. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Honestly, I really don't have much to say. I think that I've yapped myself out on how I'm doing and how everyone's doing for the past hour. That nobody.
That's what I was gonna say.
Before this,
people who are hearing this are gonna be like, "Wow, they're so calm and but we have been laughing for an hour straight.
We just played a prank.
We did.
Prank.
Played a crazy prank.
Shout out to Elliot.
Where we scared
Elliot, we miss you, bud.
Elliot,
rest in peace.
So. I admire you so much. The second, Elliot, you got off the call, because I'm assuming you're listening right now. It's kind of fun to talk like he's listening. But Elliot, the second you got off the call, I told the rest of them that if they ever did that to me, I would kill every single one of them. So I was really scared. We convinced Elliot there was a big meeting today, and he forgot about it. And then we got on, we all just yelled at him for 10
He joined this recording, which it was a good time.
Yeah, it was fun.
Josh, how are you doing?
Doing amazing. To be honest, I didn't know if we were ever going to start this recording, so I'm glad we're doing it now. Love you guys. Love you cuties.
Love my cuties.
Doing great. Yeah, I'm all kind of talked out, just kind of how Vendela and Tess said. So I guess we're Sam's cuties now. Feels good.
Did that not feel accurate for me to say, hey, cuties? That felt like the vibe.
It was good. I liked it.
Good.
It made me excited for the recording today.
Exactly. It was also because I wanted coffee and a Pop-Tart. So I'll be fully transparent about that. I made my coffee while we were on this recording. Tess, you have opening prayer. I have no transition right now. I got to get back into this.
Hey,
you have opening prayer. You want to hit us with it?
Pray us in?
Hey, cutie. Don't you want to start our prayer?
Okay. Lord, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for the joy that we share when we're in this space together. I hope that you continue to support us through this episode and through our words about your words. In your name we pray. Amen.
Well, after laughing and enjoying this time with our close friends, we're going to go to one of the saddest parts of the Bible. I guess we're about to take a real bummer. Vendela, you want to hit us with the Revelations text?
Honestly, I'm not going to be a bummer. Actually, I might actually be a bummer.
I was about to say, your text might be a bummer.
I know.
You are never a bummer.
Thanks, cutie. I think that, so my text is Revelations chapter 1, verses 4 to 8. Or 4 to 7, 4 to 8. But it's essentially, it's kind of I feel like one of the most debated books, because it's everyone's was he on acid? No, he wasn't. But was he freaking out on an island? Was he actually seeing these things? We're not really sure. But thankfully, the first part, we really don't have to worry about that. There's no dragons. There's no really crazy things in my part. What I really wanted to focus on specifically was a couple of the verses. One of them being about essentially near the end, it says all eyes will see essentially Jesus coming back to earth. Because here we have John, he's on this island, he's sending out letters to the 7 churches, and he's saying basically, this is what's going to happen. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of people are reading this after, being persecuted by Rome and during, I think, as well. So there's a lot of like not fun stuff happening, and then they're reading this, they're getting this, and it's a lot more hopeful. So I'm gonna go off that. I know there's a lot of non-hopeful parts of this where like you rot and burn in hell and stuff like that, but choosing to avoid that a little bit today. So the part that I'm gonna focus on is where it really kind of goes over who is going to essentially see Jesus coming back to earth. And then I'm going to loosely tie it in to today, which I think is not loose, but I feel like others would say it is, but I don't care because I'm doing that. So it says, look, he comes in the clouds of heaven, and everyone will see him, even those who have pierced him, and all the nations of the world will mourn for him. Yes, amen. So that's verse 7. And I think it was interesting because I was looking at a kind of like a breakdown of this passage, and it was talking about the Roman like interpretation of every eye, and it was saying it essentially means like whole, among other things, but one of the meanings is like whole, to encompass everything. And I think that's really interesting, especially when I think of people of all different religions that also believe in a God or a Jesus or a Messiah, and how a lot of people interpret this as sort of the unification of all of these different religions, essentially. And like he's bringing together the whole earth, whether that's people who pierced him, like literally, or people who, you know, are piercing him on the daily, figuratively. So I think that was really interesting, and I like that. And then also one of the other things that I enjoyed about this passage was it was talking a lot about how God sees you as an individual. It doesn't straight up say that, but like in some of the verses, it alludes to this like individualized spiritual sort of like leader he's making of each one of us. And I really enjoy that, I think, because of the context that this was written in during the Roman Empire, where like they were really any empires and any kingdom and kings sort of game plan is going to be to strip people of their autonomy, of their individuality, because it's easier to control people that way. The less diverse an audience is, the easier it is to control them. So I think it's really interesting that it was focusing a little bit on that and going over that, especially in the Bible, I think, where we focus a lot on God and like a little less on the people that are following God. So I kind of like that view of it, and how it was talking about how he's making us all like individual spiritual leaders among our friends, among our circles. And I think that was really interesting to incorporate this like sense of self into his followers. And then also just how I think that it sort of wraps up with this idea of like revolution, not through violence, which can be, you know, a touchy subject, but instead through like this sort of spiritual revolt, if that makes sense, of like everyone being so unapologetically individualized and spiritually themselves, and spreading this idea that like everybody can fit into this concept because there is no mold to originally come by. And so I really enjoy that, because I think that especially nowadays, it's very difficult to exist in a society that really enforces molds on us in order for us to enjoy any kind of benefits that we were originally told and promised. And so I think that I enjoyed my interpretation of those verses. I don't know if they're interpreted that way by everyone, but I enjoyed that. And that's pretty much all I have to say. That was kind of long-winded, and I feel like, I don't know if it was like a super far connection, but those are my thoughts.
I'm going to jump in before everybody else's response to just point out that you were like, I'm going to kind of like make a stretch that I don't know if makes sense, and then gave a genuine historical analysis that was very well put together and like had full logic throughout. So shut up, Vendela. Shut up. You did great.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Sam said. Good job, Vendela. When I was looking through kind of the document today on who was getting what in the breakdown, and I was just reading through it, I was like, I'm so glad that I have been given the verse that I've been given. And I think, because I just like how you broke it down, Vendela, in a certain way. that you did a better job than I would have done. So hats off to you. I think like how you focused on the good. I think you bring an element of focus that I would not have brought. And like how you also broke down Revelation as a book that possibly could have been written on acid. Because I think that never really heard that before, but the more I think about it, the more it could make sense. Don't think that's, love that take. But yeah, I like how you talked about the focus, you focused on the good primarily, and you talked about the unification, especially of all the other religions, specifically like the monotheistic religions. I think that is something that's very important. I like how you brought that down. I think the Bible is not just something for Christianity, but for all people, whether they like necessarily believe exactly everything. I think that certain people, I've come across a lot of people that like agree with the Bible, but also don't agree with all of it. So they're like agnostic, or they like, they're like other like Islam or Jewish maybe. I think that monotheism is such like important concept that I've really understood and come to like appreciate that. Wow. Like just see the everything we have so much more in common than like what I really realized. That's something as I've gotten to college and I've come into contact with a lot of other different people that I've come to appreciate. And then the thing that you talked about that I think was like most important that really like struck a personal chord with me, because it's something that I've like kind of struggled with, is when you talked about you, the individual, because I love the English language. I think it's great. I don't speak any other languages really. But I do think that the word you is so commonly used, and it wasn't until I got into like high school I realized, oh my God, this word has like two different meanings, such as like the group of people or the individual. And like after that, rereading the Bible and reading like some of my favorite books, or just like watching movies and thinking about the word you and having to understand that like Jesus came to die. He died for you, not just like the group, but the individual. And even if you're like the only person on this earth, he sort of died just for you, like blows my mind. And so I like it. I remember there's a very powerful sermon that I heard one time that like, I was like, whoa. So that like really reshaped my faith. And so for you to take that same idea and bring it into a very different context, such as Revelation, really was awesome for me. So I appreciate you for doing that.
Also, Josh, you saying like Jesus would have died if you were the only person on earth, he still would have done it. I feel like that's very, I don't know, I've never heard it phrased that way too. So I thought that was really cool.
There's a sermon I heard that like said that, and it rocked my world.
Yeah,
so
I think that's really awesome for people to hear as well, and people to think of it that way. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
It's very interesting. It's kind of like the downfall, I think, of like, because I like, that's why I like sometimes I want to learn a different language just so I can like read things like the Bible or watch some of my favorite movies in a different language and see how differently I would interpret them, because I feel like there's so much that I like fall out.
Ideas, mm-hmm. It's like the more beautiful and complex an idea is, it's like the more you get out of it, the more spiritual you are, the more easily it is to reach people. Yeah.
And like rereading it multiple different times in different ways is very important. So,
because there are also certain concepts that are only encapsulated in a specific language, or only encapsulated in a specific way
that don't exist in other languages
that completely capture a new meaning to it. And I think what you pointed out with you is a good example of it, of like, we, especially when I find myself doing this a lot, because I always think about like the broader aspect of it is like the body, you, the group of people, but like the individual is really hard to think about, but also we are the group of people. Like that pushed me. That was really good.
Well, when we talk about like diversity of language and how ideas can be expressed in one language better than another, and there's certain just like, I mean, think about idioms that we have in the English language, like raining cats and dogs does not make sense in any other language, because when you like translate it so surgically, it's not the same thing. But how beautiful it is when you're exposed to that diversity of language and you then have access to all of these other things. I think to some degree, a similar thing can be said for religions, to your point, Vendela, as far as like, there are certain practices that are so beautiful in some religions that we just like aren't exposed to if we're so dialed in on ourselves. And as I've gotten older and been exposed to things like that, like I was really lucky to go to or to be a part of like a smaller program within my high school that had a really large Muslim population and a really large just like Indian population and Hindu and all of these things. And so we would celebrate Diwali and things like that. And it just, I don't know, it kind of changed my perspective from like, maybe this is a hot take, but missionary work not being about like using your words to spread God's love, but more just like using your actions. Like you are a piece of it. And that doesn't mean telling people that they need to worship in a certain way or that they need to convert in a certain way, but it's more so just like meeting them where you are and where they are and allowing your own actions towards them to show your religion, whatever that is. Like, it's not about forcing it on them. It's about saying like, hey, even when you bring God's love into it, I feel like that's such a big excuse that I hear about forceful missionary work is like, oh, I'm spreading God's love. But like spreading God's love doesn't have to just be telling someone that like God loves them. Like it's more about how you treat them than it is reading a Bible verse to them. And so it's just, I don't know, like everything that people have said is making me think a lot about just how do we share that, and also how do, even outside of sharing that, how do we find those commonalities that are just what make us human, and that's what we live with, and that's how we like live together.
And even Tess, connecting what you and Josh said, like God's love isn't contingent on who you are. Like it's contingent on, like nothing actually. Like maybe if you want to talk about like salvation or get into that, that's a whole different thing, but like it's not contingent on anything. So I think that it's just really, it's frustrating when people try to define that, I think, to me, depending on like certain qualities.
And to tie all of that, Vendela, back to something you said in the beginning, why is John on an island? John is on an island because the people in power, the political people in power, are trying to make a single narrative and trying to get rid of the diversity that we're talking about to make a single way that you can be a good person. Which is exactly what Tess is talking. It's the same energy that Tess is talking about in like very specific Christian missionary understanding. It's the same idea we see politically now, Vendela, that you were talking about, and societally right now. Like that is the same narrative that keeps coming up. It is a constant throughout history.
They're trying to erase the diversity of people because it's easier to control them that way.
Correct.
And it's crazy because when you read Revelation, there's so many different verses that are like super like almost, what is it, like treason. Like the way that they word things are like, I mean, you don't realize it now, but like if you read it then, you'd be like, I'm afraid to even have this in my possession. Like, you know.
And what I want to say with this specific verse, this is the first thing that jumped out to me, but all of what we're saying is like re-hitting on it. Verse 6, and has made us to be a kingdom and priests to serve his God and Father. To him be glory and power forever and ever. Amen. We are meant to build the kingdom of heaven, of earth as it is in heaven, to build an equal and just society. But that verse is not calling us to be kings or gatekeepers or generals. We're not being told to like go, like Tess said, we're not being told to go force everybody into it. We are not the controllers. We are the priests. We are called to be the priest, to just say what we believe and show love in a way that we were taught. And that, I think, is the key distinction that we miss so much. And by we, I do mean the general, like, Christianity as a whole. Is like, that is what we're being called to. We're not being called to go tear down every other kingdom and go take prisoners and make sure everybody knows that we're correct. We're told to build a kingdom by being priests and by living that out. And that, I think, is the solution to all of the narratives we just talked about of trying to control people by removing individuality. Because that is something that has a long, long-rooted history in Christianity. Because I'll say it, we haven't been persecuted since the Roman times. And there's a lot of people who still think we are. And so use that as the example to go do it. And so all of that, I think, is wrapped up in it is the distinction between made us to be a kingdom and to be kings and queens or generals, or it is to be priests. So, see, I knew this was going to be a good episode. I knew we were going to get into shit on this episode.
I mean, we're 35 minutes in, and I just went, so.
That is true. That is also true. With that, we're going to speed on through. I hear you, Vendela. And we're going to, Josh, you want to take us with the Acts text?
Yeah, so I love that. I'm just so proud of us that we just still have things to talk about. And so, like, we're still going, you guys, even though we did a whole hour before just yapping, and we're still yapping. So I have Acts chapter 5, verses 27 through 35. And this is a part of the Bible that I want to say, like, I struggle with, but, like, I definitely forget. Because in my mind, growing up in the church, Easter happens, Jesus gets resurrected, you know, the stones rolled away, and it's this huge party. And in my mind, like, basically the Bible's over. And that's not true. There still is a lot of history that happens and a lot of, like, important things that I know that I forget when talking about the story of the Bible, specifically about the disciples who now have become, like, quote unquote apostles, and they are now doing these wonderful things. And even though Jesus rose from the dead, their life still sucks. And not everything is just like Easter bunny and daisies and Easter baskets and lovely brunch food and all the things that Easter is. It's still like they're still being persecuted, and that's something that you guys might be like, oh, duh. But, like, for me, I don't know why that just doesn't resonate. Like, I just forget that for sometimes. Like, I just think, oh, this happened and now things good, when that's not the case. And so Acts chapter 5 kind of talks a little bit about that. And I just want to, like, just name and call out the vibe switch of this chapter in particular. It seems like there's a lot of highs and lows. If you just read, like, the titles, it goes from the apostles heal money, and it's like 4 verses, and then immediately goes to the apostles are persecuted. And so it's just like, oh my gosh, like, this is, I guess that's just the way the missions fields work and what it is to be a Christian. Your life is going to be a lot of ups and downs. I feel like anyone's life is that, but I feel as Christians, we are called to kind of sit through that even more, I would say. And it's part of being Christian is, like, the highs and lows. So I just want to call that out. What's really crazy to me is I find it interesting to call that the apostles were called on the high priest because they were doing these crazy acts and, like, still saying these things, even though they're like, hey, you know, the high priest and the people in power, like, okay, we killed Jesus. Like, this whole movement should shut up. And wasn't the case. These apostles still did these marvelous acts. And I think that's not, I think we gloss over that. I've been, like I said, I forget a lot about this. So I don't think I've come to appreciate, like, how hard it was that they were able to do this without Jesus, do these miracles and these wonderful things. I just think about the bravery that it took, even though they're still being persecuted and they're still like, no. And like, for them, I'd be like, okay, Jesus rose from the dead. Like, my life's chill. And that's not what Jesus told them. They were actually thrown in jail, and then an angel had to come and save them. And then the high priests are like, oh, what's going on? Like, you guys need to stop doing this. And the disciples are like, did you not just see? Like, the angels just came and saved us from jail. Like, this is obviously something that's going on. And it just kind of reminded me of the fact that there's some people who, like, still can have the facts right in front of them as far as, like, the faith and the word of Christ and the gospel and everything, but they still just, like, aren't able to believe it until people have to look other people in the eyes. Because there is an instance of that. Where is it? Verse 34 says there's a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, and he was super against it. But then while the apostles were on trial, he stood up and was like, no, like, this is right. But there's obviously something to these, what these guys are saying. And who are we to just try and kill them again? Like, we shouldn't just try and stone them again. Like, this movement isn't going to die by us just doing this. We need to, like, change. We need to, like, accept this new thing that's happening. So yeah, that's just something that I'm going to, like, it's going to be in the back of my mind as this Easter season is, how can I, like, one-on-one look people in the eyes and try and maybe make a change? I know, like, I can't do that, but I can be, like, a vessel or an instrument for God to change them. So I just found that interesting. Interested to hear your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, I feel like two main things to comment on. The first being the realization that like these men were like at the side of Jesus. They are now apostles, like, and yet they still are being thrown in jail and like all of these things. Like sometimes I think we forget that hot take. I'm making a lot of hot takes on this episode. That religion is a social construct, and it is because you have the grace and the salvation and everything from God. That doesn't mean that your life's easy, and it doesn't mean that everything's going to be like pretty pink unicorns and rainbows all the time. And like we are still humans. Like shit happens, and even praying about something and maybe your prayers are heard and maybe it turns out the way you want it to, maybe it doesn't. Like those are all parts of being human and living your life. Like all of those things happen. And so instead of, I've seen so many people, like blame God when something that like that happens, and it's definitely a moment of reckoning with your faith, but it's not fair to assume that like, oh my gosh, I did everything correct, I'm the perfect Christian, why is my life not working out the way I want it to? Like that's just not realistic. And instead changing your mentality to think about like, okay, what can I learn from this experience? Like XYZ didn't happen the way I wanted it to. Let me find some like meaning in that. And I'm not saying that everything happens for a reason. Sam knows those words will never like seriously come out of my mouth, but finding some meaning and some opportunity for growth in whatever does happen. So I loved that point. And then also your question there at the end, as far as like, how can we show up and look someone in the eyes and see them for what they are and who they are, and then hopefully find a way to move forward and change them, or maybe not change them, whatever that looks like, but just showing up and taking that first step and deeply connecting with someone. I think that's always like such a good goal and just thing to have in the back of your head.
I'm going to comment specifically what you just said, Tess, and then go on to what I was going to say. Josh, you were reading this and you were explaining the ending, and I like reading along as people are reading it. And I was like, the last verse is Galileo, I think that's how you say it. I don't know. He says, men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do for these men. And then that's the end of your verse. And I was like, why does it cut off there? That's a shitty place to cut off. And so while you were talking, I opened the rest of it on my laptop and was reading the rest of it. And Tess, it's exactly your point, because they're not freed. They're flogged. They are whipped and beaten, and then they are let go. And like that, it is a hot take, but like that is that they literally get flogged and then they're allowed to leave. And that's the good ending. That's not to say that their life is perfect. It's not to say that God prevented them from getting any injury. It is still really hard when you're up against a state and a political entity that wants to kill you. It still hurts. Like you were not perfectly. Does that make like that's your life it's not perfect because you're so faithful. It's still awful sometimes and really hard, and that's part of being human. And yet they still continued to go proclaim the good news and keep teaching. So that's to that point. But my thing that I was gonna say is in the same section, Josh, right after your verse, where you're talking about of like why they chose to let them go and what they were talking about. I love his reasoning, because his reasoning that he eventually says, he talks about all of the different people who have tried to lead a revolution like this before, and they've murdered them. And then he's like, so that's not going to work. And he says, if these people are leading this by man alone, it's not going to work. So we don't need to worry about them. If this is by God, something will come from this, and we can't stop that. And I think that that's really powerful to me, of like knowing the difference, especially with what we just talked about with narratives, especially that the narratives that spin into Christian nationalism and spread into this very specific strain, when it is led by humans and not led by God, does it work? I think that's a really beautiful, maybe too simple, but it gives me hope kind of way to think about it, of all of these times when people say that they're in the name of the Messiah, but they're doing it for human greed or want, it doesn't work. Yeah, I have no ending.
I mean, yeah, I feel like when it's led by humans, it's just not sustainable, because I think that everybody's needs are changing all the time. And when you strip people of their individuality and you just focus on the one need that that the people that are following you have, it's going to change eventually. I think, and also like, I don't know, I enjoyed hearing what you were saying, Sam. And then I think that also, in addition, not only were they flogged for those essentially social repercussions of their faith, but they also rejoiced that they were punished for their faith, which I think was really interesting. Like the last verse, they were like thanking God that they were worthy of being punished for being serving him so well that it got noticed enough that they were punished for it, if that makes sense. So I think that's really interesting. I don't really know how I feel about that. I just read that and I was like, that's a really interesting way of thinking about your faith. And then I was like, okay, well, if I equate that to something socially, like, for example, like getting noticed for a cause that like you're really proud of, that you feel like helps a lot of people, the repercussions of that would maybe be policy written that prevents you from doing that. And it's like, okay, they saw us as a threat, like, you know, and that's to be noticed, is to be shown that like your cause, that it's building momentum. And I think that, of course, it's frustrating to be shut down when you believe in something that is really amazing, when people are choosing not to, they're picking and choosing what parts of things they want and stuff like that, and they're not choosing yours is really frustrating. But I think that it's an interesting way of looking at it. I think I'm a little cynical, so like sometimes when I think about that, I'm like, okay, that's dumb. Like I'm not going to be thanking anybody for the fact that like somebody's basically punishing me for being me. But I am going to be grateful for the fact that it's getting noticed. I think that that's the first step of change of any kind. And yeah, so that's all I have to say about that. But yeah.
I'm trying to be careful on how I say this, but it's the same idea of like being arrested and being beaten for a cause. It's the exact same mentality. And like this, I believe in this so full-heartedly that I will have things taken away from me because it's the right thing to do. Yeah. So with that, we're going to take our break. And we'll be back after this with a psalm that I think is happier. I think we'll get a little lighter once we get back.
Let's keep it dark.
This is our dark episode. So we'll be right back after this, I guess.
Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Hi guys, welcome to Holy Spirit. It's a new podcast where we dive into the gospel with a little help from our beverages of choice.
Jesus met people where they were, at tables, over meals, with stories that made the sacred feel ordinary and the ordinary feel sacred. Holy Spirits follows that same tradition, creating space for honest, authentic conversations about faith, just as he did.
Crap, I gotta think of something goofy. We're gonna have Studio Wesley intern, those beautiful people. You're drinking the drink right now, and a special guest. It's gonna be awesome. We're gonna tell great stories about the Bible. It's gonna be a great learning experience for everyone. And I just spilled my drink all over my Xbox controller.
Guys, this is getting crazy.
Can you do the TikTok edit? Like,
Mike's gonna literally have such a hard time editing.
So, Our first episode.
Why? Y'all laughing at me?
So grab a drink, get comfortable, and join us as we make the gospel a little looser.
We expect to see you, drink in hand, prepared to watch us talk about things with drinks.
Drinks and things.
Cheers to that.
Drinks, things, and beautiful people.
Bye.
All right, I'm getting paper towels.
Honestly, I think that would be a great outro.
I think we killed it.
Holy Spirits can be found on all Studio Wesley Annex channels. Remember, drink responsibly, avoid excessive alcohol use, and always follow John Wesley's first general rule: do no harm.
And we're back. My new thing is I'm just gonna, when it's with this group, we're just gonna randomly start and we're just gonna see what happens because we've been yapping today. Tess, hit us with the psalm. Please make this episode a little lighter.
Oh, absolutely. So I have Psalm 150. It is the final psalm, and it, honestly, y'all, there's not a whole lot of substance here. I'm gonna try to spin something out of nothing and make it sound really good. But for the most part, it is as psalm gets. It is just worship. It is just a piece of praise. Like, the majority of the words in here are literally just naming different instruments that the writer intends to worship with. But as we were having our conversation earlier, and one of the commentaries that I read on this pointed out that, you know, there's this massive diversity of ways in which we can praise that are listed here. Because it starts with, like, where do you praise? What do you praise for? But then verses 3 through 5 are literally just how do you praise? And so between the trumpet, the harp, it mentions dancing at one point, the clash of cymbals, like all of these different things. And so in our conversation earlier, when we were talking about Revelations, I think it's the same idea that, like, diversity not only brings people together, but it amplifies our commonalities as well. And so looking at this piece of text, like, what if the only instrument they had listed was the trumpet? What if you don't play the trumpet? Are you not allowed to praise? Like, how does that work? But instead, it's just like, verse 6 goes, let everything that has breath praise the Lord. You can literally praise the Lord just by breathing. That's, like, as simple as it gets. And so if we were to eliminate these and say, you know, there's one way that we praise and that's it, like, anything else doesn't matter, isn't acceptable, blah, 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 it completely changes the meaning. But instead, in this psalm, and I think it's so meaningful that it's the last psalm, is literally just let everything that has breath praise the Lord. However we choose to do that, it could be through music, it could be through dancing, through moving our body, or literally just through breathing. Like, I think that's so powerful, especially in the context of everything else that we've talked about this episode. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'd love to hear some thoughts. Also, if anybody has an instrument that was not included on this list and that they know how to play, I want to know that.
Where's the harmonica? I don't
Yes.
know. Harmonica. That was the first thing I thought of. I also don't have much to add with this text. Like you said, it is very straightforward. The only thing I will say, and I don't want this to sound like it's against your point, I think it is in support of your point, is also all of these things are external, even breathing. And that, like, worship in any way that you can, worship in all the ways that you can, but also it is not only an internal thing. It is not only you. And that's what I think is, I appreciate about this is, like, I'm someone who very much, like, intellectualizes and thinks about religion more than I, like, feel, you know, I don't feel my faith as much as I think about it. I don't know why I'm doing hand motions for this. And so being told explicitly, like, do something external. Stop just thinking about it and analyzing it, but, like, do something that is just passion and feeling. because I think that's really important, and that's something I struggle with. And I think that's in support of what you're saying, Tess, of all these ways, no matter how you worship, do it. Worship. Go out with it. I'll stop. So I stop doing my hand motions now.
I like that. I also think, so, okay, one thing about me is I used to conduct orchestras, and yes, new lore? I thought this
None of
lore
us
I had
knew
already
this, I don't
shared.
think.
I knew you were an orca dork because you were the one who told me that phrase the first time, and I've never
Yeah.
forgotten that.
Yeah.
But I didn't know you conducted.
Listen, if I wasn't a little cringy, like, I would actually be unstoppable. So I have to be a little bit, okay? So, yeah. So I was an orca dork. I conducted orchestras through middle and high school. So, like, honestly, not professionally. It wasn't anything crazy, but it was really fun. High school was kind of intense, I'm not going to lie. But I just think of it as, like, this is going to sound so cheesy, but, like, if it was only bass, like, instruments, it would sound like shit, okay? It would sound so bad. Also, the fact that everybody is playing to a certain beat the whole time is really important, but then also that everybody has different parts and is playing in different key. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it all comes together to make something meaningful, and, like, each part is not, like, I don't know. So I feel like when you're talking about different instruments, like, worshiping in different ways, I feel like the diversity of instruments, I know this is a thing that we've been saying this whole time, but, like, is important, because otherwise you're not going to get the full breadth of the meaning of the religion, which is that everybody's accepted, everybody's loved, however you want to worship, it's going to be accepted, all the things. And I think it's similarly like every, instrument is needed in order to create one large piece, because you wouldn't go see an orchestra of only basses, because, like I said, that would sound really bad and it'd probably make your ears bleed. So yeah, that's all I have to say, really. Yes, that is it. Goodbye.
Hello. I just want to highlight the thing that Tess said. I agree with everything you guys said. What Tess said specifically about it being the last psalm, I think, like, holds a certain significance to me, because think about Psalms, right? There's a lot of different Psalms, a lot of ups and downs. We've talked about this before on our podcast. But for this Psalm, for the book of Psalms, to go out on this short but sweet, like, note, pun intended there, see what I did? I think is, like, super important, and, like, that holds a certain significance to me, that, like, this is how they want to end it, is like, hey, for me, when I read this, like, I know this isn't, like, necessarily true, but it's like, there is no wrong way to worship, I think. Like, I know that's not really true, but that's, like, the vibe I get. It's like, hey, just hit that cymbal or just play that trumpet. It doesn't even have to sound good. You just need to do it. And I think there's something to be said about what Sam, when I read this, like, I didn't even realize it, but these are all external things. These are all external things. It's like how Sam highlighted that. And I think there's something specifically about music, right? It's like a wholly separate podcast. Talk about that. About someone, like, you're giving up a part of yourself and expressing yourself, and it's for others to enjoy. And you can't just do that internally. It needs to be, like, it's a form of expression. And it's very eye-opening, like, as a listener, to, like, you can talk, but then there's something about, like, an instrument with, like, certain emotion that conveys emotion and makes you feel some type of way. And in a method that I don't think words can always do. So yeah, I just like to talk about something. I'm obviously reading this. I'm not a very musically talented person at all. It's just, like, kind of calls me out, like, maybe I need to start getting into music and be an orca dork. Maybe I'll be a better Christian or whatever if I do that. But yeah, I really like this way that this, like, sums it up. And that the whole long book of Psalms that, like, is a huge chunk of the Bible ends on this note of just praise the freaking Lord. And it doesn't matter how you do it. Just do it externally. Praise the freaking Lord. Put that on a shirt.
Can we get that? I was about to say, can we get that as merch, please?
Yeah.
Praise the freaking Lord.
Praise the freaking Lord. Just do it.
I think we also need shirts that say "Orca dorks make the best Christians." That's
And
Yep.
they do. I was president of my first priority in middle school. So
Nice flex.
don't even at me. I
Nice
knew
flex.
all of it. Yeah.
I also really like what you said at the beginning, Vendela. If I wasn't a little cringe, I'd be unstoppable.
I'm sorry, I'm amazing. Like, you can't find much. So
It's there, apparently, but it's hard
we
to
have to
It's hard
take
to
what we
find.
can get.
Exactly. And you know what? That's okay.
I'm really glad, Tess, that you have this psalm because it provided a little bit up because we're gonna go down for a little bit, but I promise we're gonna probably come up. Probably gonna end on a good note, I think. So I said, peek behind the curtains for the audience. I said to everybody on this call that I wrote down like 2 sentences about this part because I knew with this group I was going to be able to just talk and things were just going to come out. And hearing specifically the verses and the things we discussed today, I don't need my 2 sentences. Like this text is the embodiment of what we talked about today. So we're at John 20, 19 through 31, which last year, the Easter texts are the only ones I remember what I said because they're always the same. So last year, I remember spending a whole time on Doubting Thomas. And I think I made some like the defense of Doubting Thomas. And I still stand by all that I said. Not going to talk about it at all. Don't think it's important for me.
I remember that episode. That was iconic. That was
Yeah,
iconic
me too.
episode.
I remember that.
Okay, see, it's the only ones I remember because it's the same text every time. But I'm not going to do that this time because one thing I have been thinking about, both as an individual with my faith, but also as somebody who has to host this podcast every week, is what does Easter look like this year? How does Easter feel different with just everything that's going on in the world, no matter where you're coming from? Like I've said multiple times, everybody's feeling something. So what does Easter look like this year? And I think the beginning of this text is what Easter looks like for some this year. Like we've been talking about, this is post-resurrection, like Josh said. It's not all Easter bunnies and daisies. This is the time where people start getting very heavily persecuted. So we open this scene. I like to think of it in direct parallel, like one after the other, to the story of the resurrection. Because we have this moment of the disciples, of Mary Magdalene being there and seeing Jesus and running out, and there's joy and there's light. And then we cut to a dark room with a locked door and all the disciples huddling for their life. Because we were in a room, it said that the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders. These are Jewish people hiding from the leaders of their community because they know that they want to hurt them and want to kill them. They're being persecuted by their own people and their own state. Pause on that. There are going to be people right now who feel that way. And I think that's an important thing to name right now. It is a scary time, not just in our nation, in our world right now. And so I think that juxtaposition of intense light and intense joy right to this is really important to name this Easter, because not everybody is going to be feeling the joy of Easter while it's coming. The commentary I read, I wrote down a quote, and I knew I was going to say it at some point, but it said, "The Easter season of Alleluias can sometimes seem to leave little room for our doubts, our fears, and our pain. We tend to forget that for the first disciples, there was fear, doubt, and pain and confusion before there was understanding and joy of what had taken place." This is that moment. They are scared for their life, rightfully so, because they are being persecuted by a state that doesn't like them because they said that all people should be loved and cared for. So we're in this scene. I wanted to do all that to set where we're at, because then the locked door, which is very important, the locked door, the defenses that these disciples have put up to protect them from the world, is broken by Jesus coming in and saying, "Peace be with you," and giving them a moment of peace, showing them their leader again, showing them that there is hope again, showing them that there is still something to go on to. He enters and he says, "Peace be with you." And he immediately shows them his hands and his side. He shows them what has happened. He embodies the miracle for them, and they are filled again with hope. And that's a lot to ask for this Easter. That's a lot to ask for in general. Like Tess said, we cannot make promises that as Christians it's always going to happen this way. But that is the story that's being told to us, is people who are afraid and are scared for their life and have put up these walls to protect them from the world outside that hates them. And a religious leader, a Messiah, breaking down those doors to bring peace. But that's not the end of this. That's probably the best part, and that's what I want to focus on today. But that's not the end of this, because then he says, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. It is not enough to give you peace. It is not enough to feel this joy and hope again for the first time. You also have to go give it to other people, because there are probably still people who are in locked rooms and who are scared for their lives and who need to hear this. And the only other thing I wanted to say about this is that it then says, if you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven. And I read that and I was like, whoa, I'm developing a beautiful metaphor here. Why are we talking about sin all of a sudden? And the commentary I read was actually really helpful and talked about John's description of sin encompasses disbelief and is not always about doing something wrong. And so if that part gives you pause, which it did for me, it's interesting to think about giving them belief again, giving them faith again, giving them hope again, instead of condemning them for their sins. Because I think that is what Jesus is saying, is I'm here to give you peace. Now you go give it to the world. So I knew I'd come up with something with this, and I think it was only possible because of all the things that we talked about today. So love to hear your thoughts on that one.
I think, as always, Sam, everything you say takes me a second to digest. But I like that you kind of hold our hand through it, your thought process. I think that as you were going through it, I literally write down things that you say, because I'm like, okay, from this to this, all right, cool, and then we go from there to there, all right. I think that what resonated with me the most, obviously it was all beautiful, but when you said it's not enough to just be given this peace and hope, but there are people that are also behind locked doors, and it is essentially your duty to go and give it to other people. I think that concept of having a duty to make the world a better place, essentially, you could just say, is something that I have really been thinking about a lot recently, especially when it comes to the visibility of marginalized people, because it's like the more visible you are, the more people can feel like they can come out into the open. And I think that it's really interesting, this idea of visibility and how we present ourselves in our religion, because I think that a lot of times as a Christian, I'll suppress certain qualities in myself because I'm privileged enough that I can do that. I can just make it not as visible that I'm really all that different than a lot of the things that some people are expecting of me as a Christian. And so, but in doing that, I think I'm really harming the people that don't really have a choice to make those parts of them invisible. And so I don't know if I'm getting too broad with this. I could get more specific, but I think that the concept of it being your duty to spread peace and hope, and in my head, I'm seeing that through being more outwardly expressive of your individuality. I know we've been talking about that a lot, but it's really on my mind. I think that it is our duty as Christians, it's our duty as good people in general, in a monotheistic religion, essentially, really, to do that, because I think that it's sort of, it's really repressive for other people. I think that people don't understand the weight of picking and choosing which qualities we show when other people don't have that choice, if that makes sense. And yeah, so that's kind of what resonated with me, and thank you for that.
Yes, 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 yes. You are not being too. Yes, yes.
Yes. I, Sam, also agree with Vendela about how you take us on this journey. It feels like you're a tour guide in a lot of ways. I think you have a certain gift that I'm often jealous of, that you're able to you walk, you Vendela said, you take our hand, but then you also okay, now go explore this on your own idea, and I'm going to put you in here, and I'm going to give you the boundary, the context. Okay, now what do you guys think? Oh, okay, this is what I think. You have a certain gift, which is why I think you're the great host for this podcast. Yeah, I agree with what Vendela said about kind of the choice. I think is very interesting, and it's interesting reading this in comparison and contrast, like with the verse that I was given. Because I didn't really realize this, but it's like just how pivotal this moment is. It's so cool that like Jesus is able to like come back to them. You know what I mean? Like they get that closure. I know personally in my relationships, like there was a huge goodbye that happened, and I'm like, oh, but where are they now? Like what happens next? And no one really is able to give that to them. I think it's so important that Jesus comes back like to these disciples, like, hey, it gives them this duty of what your next job is, and it's like, I didn't do all this work just for y'all to sit around. Y'all need to do something with this, and start the church or whatever. I think John's perspective on this, I'm not sure if the other gospels like give a summary, but just the last two verses of his book about, this is what I've written. There are many other things that happened that I didn't write, but I wrote these first for purpose. Like there's a reason why I did these. You have to like trust me here. And I hope that he's like, first you need to like accept this, but then go do something with it. And like I say, he's very specific about that order, about this needs to happen, and then you do this, which I think is important. Not just the duty, but then also like believing it first. So like a lot of people today are looking for a purpose in their life, and so they latch on to like Christianity or religion or whatever, but they don't. They see it. They want to like display that and show how great their life is with Christ. They want the duty, but they don't like believe it first. I'm not sure if that makes any sense at all. I feel like I'm talking in a circle, but you guys are shaking your heads, so I'm gonna go with it. Yeah, I really like how you did this, Sam. I think this verse is really important because like the end of, it's weird. I think today we ended with the end of Psalms and we did the end of John as well. So it's like interesting. I don't know if it was the Easter season or what, but yeah.
So I'm going to start my piece by saying, just because I know it makes him really uncomfortable, that I also think Sam did such a great job. And
Sam, you're doing so good.
You're doing so great, Cody.
I hate all of you, but I don't know how to deal with this part.
But yeah, and I think it's really interesting to draw the connection to what we were talking about earlier, as far as things don't always happen the way that we expect them to, or want them to, or even like think that they possibly could. Like, I don't think any of the disciples put Jesus in there thinking, you know what, maybe there's a chance that he comes back. Like, it could happen. Like, it just, sometimes life just works in mysterious ways. And yeah, that's one of my favorite things about being on these episodes, is just being able to draw parallels. Like, none of us know what the other people are planning to say. Half the time, I don't know what I'm planning to say until I actually get on here, and then I'm like inspired by something else that someone said. And so I love drawing all of these strings between the verses and finding connections between like really scary passages and really happy passages, and like passages that we're all super familiar with and ones that we've never read before or often just like forget even exist. Like, I think it's so cool to find those parallels and find those connections between them.
Yeah. I would have no like we have a closing prayer we could do. That'll give me a second to get back in my head. Vendela, do you want to take us in the closing?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't even get that far down in the friggin' like schedule, so I didn't even know I was doing that, but
I believe in you. You got this.
Thanks. Alrighty. Hey God, thank you so much for us being safe and healthy on this call. I always pray for that because those are some of my two biggest prayers that I have. Also, thank you for us all feeling comfortable enough to share our thoughts on this, which is sort of reflective of our individuality, what we all think, how our opinions are different, and yet we're all coming together and we're reading the scripture and we're really thinking about it in a real world way. And it's not often you get to do that, I feel like, nowadays in a safe space. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that everybody listening can also find some peace with what we chatted about today. Thank you so much. Amen.
I want to thank everybody at home for listening to this episode. I know it was probably a wild one. I can't imagine listening to this as a podcast and not knowing the full context of like our relationships and stuff. But I also want to, usually I do this in the reverse order, but I want to thank you guys for being on this, because I also think I can't believe I'm going to say this, but with the last text we just talked about of being in the locked room, whether it's that or whether it's the psalm of praise of being in the orchestra, part of the way we get through all this is doing it together. And I think the fact that we have been on this recording for 2 hours shows that like that's kind of our group and that's kind of what we do. So yeah, I'm getting sappy. Take that, cuties. So thank you guys for being on this. Thank you guys for being in part of this relationship. And with that, all God's people are going to say bye.
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 Bye.